Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Reynaldo Cervantes, and welcome to this session of Latino Perspectives. Latino Perspectives is a program that's designed to bring you the latest and the greatest in the Omaha area, in the state area, in the national area, from a Latino perspective. Of course, I'm a Chicano, so Chicano perspective. Anyway, this is Latino Perspective. I'm the host. I'm also the producer and the creator of this program. And tonight, I want to thank Samuel Gomez, who's the proprietor of La Esmeralda. We're announcing tonight that we're opening a satellite office in South Omaha, and we're going to be located at 32nd and Q Street. And I'll get you the specific address later on, but it's right across the street from La Esmeralda Strip Mall on 32nd and Q Street. And Cherry Clark and Bill Clark, who own the City Commons. The City Commons is a studio. They have one in North Omaha, and now they're going to have one in South Omaha. And this is the inaugural broadcast of the City Commons television network. And my show comes on first, Latino Perspective, and then later on we're going to break in a brand new show with a brand new host, Abelardo Hernandez. He's coming on and doing a show called Charla con la Comunidad. Charla con la Comunidad, chatting with the community. And it's a brand new concept, and he's going to be on. It'll be a Spanish speaking, I think, but he can do either or Spanish or English. And then we're going to also record the Grito Hispano. And if you're interested, give us a call. I'll put all that information. But we hope we're opening this center to accommodate and facilitate people from the South Side who want to come in and develop a program and put it on the air. Eventually, we're going to have live webcasts, and we're going to have like a live television studio production, but it's going to be a webcast. So it's going to be on a computer, and we're going to have a variety of programs, a variety of talk programs, a variety of historical, food programs, all kinds of programs. We're going to be on 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And so if you're interested, I'll give you the call numbers in a few seconds. Today, this is part two of I don't know how many parts that has to do with identity, the identity crisis that one goes through in their lives. If you're like me, an American of Mexican descent, and you've been influenced by a hegemonic system that doesn't leave any room for you and forces you into a second-class citizenship, a minority type status. And I think spinning off of last week's or the last presentation, I think we were at the point where we were talking about the fact that we lose our identity and that you begin to realize that once you go out and experience life, that things are a little bit different, and that you have to adjust your life because they're not going to adjust the system, and the system is in place. It's rooted in bigotry and racism, not on purpose. Again, it's the fact that they're inflexible and have not reached out and embraced the diversity and the different ethnicities of the immigrants who actually make up this great nation. And when you talk about the need to self-identify, that's critical because if you don't, you're left out in the cold, as I was and as I explained the last time. I had lost my identity as I went through the assimilation grinder, trying to be white. You always strive to be white. Now that I'm just talking to you about my experience, nobody else's. talking to you about my experience. So I think we talked about the fact that I went to look for a job at the job service, and I ended up in the line with where they said, you go over there so we can get you your acreage of beets, you know. And so all my dreams, all my aspirations were busted because the jobs that I wanted were not for me, and they told me to my face to get out of Dodge, be my best bet. You know, when you look back on it in hindsight, when you have a community of about 12,000, of course, I was a post-war child, and so we had the largest high school class. In fact, they had to build a new high school for us. That economy just cannot accommodate everyone. And the way that it's not what you know, it's who you know, that's very prominent in small cities like that. And you just didn't see any brown faces in any of the professional positions or any of the white-collar jobs, let's call them. And so I hit the wall, what I call the glass wall of reality, and because you go through this identity crisis, because the more you try to be something you're not, the more you're going to hate yourself. And you go through the self-hatred when almost anything that deals with what you are, Mexicanism or whatever you want to call yourself, you view as negative. And that's why I think I mentioned the fact that in Omaha, for example, and it's just a manifestation and a reflection of the programming that they've done in terms of inculcating or programming you to think that you're not part of society, to the point where you just hold your breath. If you hear of a crime, a violent crime somewhere, you say, oh my gosh, I hope it's not a Mexican. You know, and that issue, it just kind of explains it all, that being a Mexican has got all of these negative connotations. And the reason it has all these negative connotations is the fact that the system does not nurture that. It nurtures a white Anglo-Saxon type of a system, of your history. I think I talked about to the victor belongs the spoils, and so they own the history, and they own the culture, and they own our traditions. Meanwhile, you don't fit anywhere. You're like and that's really serious. Because once you realize you don't fit, you kind of blame yourself for not, you begin to blame yourself for not being able to fit until you begin to understand the system, and then you begin to understand yourself and what you have to do to self-identify. And that's what we talked about, the Chicano movement here in Omaha that I was introduced to. Actually, I got introduced to it in Scotts Bluff, but when I moved to Omaha, we created a center that was called the Chicano Awareness Center, which was right in line with my awakening, my enlightenment, because it was Corky Gonzalez's poem, Yo Soy Joaquin, that when I read that poem, I understood it exactly what it meant. And that poem is critical, and I will later on in my these different programs, I'm going to discuss Yo Soy Joaquin. But anyway, what it does is it makes you self-identify. What it does is say, okay, I understand that I'll never be white. You can't be white. So you're going to be what you are. What are you? Well, you're an American of Mexican descent. And so you begin to say, well, what is it about me? What is it about my culture, my heritage, that I can be proud of? And that's where Yo Soy Joaquin came into place, because he actually says, you know, that he told me through his poem, he said, you know, my grandparents went through this, my parents went through that, and now my generation is going through it. And once you begin to understand the positive aspects of who you are, your raza, the fact that you come from great civilizations, the fact that you have great traditions, a great culture, a great language. Those are really reinforcing positive components of who you are. And the system always tries to pigeonhole you into a group. And back then it was Mexican Americans. Today it's Latinos. And so while they're doing that, and the demographics are changing in the United States, where you have not only Mexicans, Americans of Mexican descent, you have all kinds of Latinos, so to speak. And Latinos is not a monolith. In other words, it's not one culture. It's not one group. It's everything. It's Peruvians, it's Mexicans, it's Costa Ricans, it's Nicaraguans, it's Guatemalans, Panamanians, Colombians, everything. And within these different groups, there's hundreds of subgroups. You have native people. You have people that talk different language, different dialects, and they bring with them different traditions and different customs. As I had the remnants of the customs of my parents, my grandparents, which was like celebrating the Cinco de Mayo on September 16th and going to Mexican dances and what have you. Well, all of that began to reinforce, but more importantly, what I had to do was, and what the Chicano movement did, was to tell me that I'm not going to be pigeonholed into a Mexican American. That I'm going to self-identify, and that's what the going popular thing was to do, is to say, I'm going to identify who I am. I'm going to define who I am, and I don't have to go ask the Gabacho nothing. I don't have to ask nobody nothing, and so I am a Chicano. So everybody said, well, what's a Chicano? Well, I know what a Chicano is. Well, what we did is we stumped the wasp. They could no longer pigeonhole us, and so we had people that were pretty much had hit the glass wall of identity, but couldn't see what I seen in terms of self-enlightenment, and they kept on that road to trying to be a part of what they could never be. And so we had a problem not only from white America, we had a problem from within our own community of very conservative people who felt that Chicano was a bad word. They try to make it a negative. It says whether Chicano is really close to chicanery, and so it's a negative chicanery. I mean, we took it in the shorts, as they say, especially when I came here to Omaha. Now, even if you say, I want to identify with a certain group, with a certain culture, with a certain custom, you have to have something, you have to have a platform from which to operate out of. You have to have a group, you have to have an organization, and that's when we created the Chicano Awareness Center. So we could take what I was learning, what everybody else was learning, and trying to embellish their positive aspects of who they are, the language, the cuisine, the music, everything, and make it positive. So we created this Chicano Awareness Center to bring awareness to individuals like me, who at that time were second and third generation Americans of Mexican descent. We're talking back in the 60s and 70s, when the whole state of Nebraska only had about 45, I don't even think it had 15, 20,000. I don't know how many there were in Omaha, but you could count them on one hand almost. Now, we started the Chicano Awareness Center. We had dance groups, we had theater groups, dance groups that were related to our culture. We had theater groups, we had art classes, we had language classes. We had everything, and we worked real closely with the University of Nebraska, and both University of Nebraska and Lincoln University of Nebraska at Omaha, and the churches. They all were really supportive of us. And of course the music. The music. I think I told you I fell in love with the music, and I'm doing a project now, and I don't know if I mentioned it last time on, where I'm putting up some the music that I used to play in after my enlightenment, my Mexican music, plus my rock and roll music and all that. But at the center, where I got started in that music, in Mexican music, was when the center, in fact, the Espejo, the Barriento girls, Mary Espejo and Mary Louise Barrientos. Well, Mary Louise, what's her last name? Granados. Mary Louise Granados. And they approached me and they says, hey, we sing, how about us, because we're going to have a grand opening at the Chicano Awareness Center. And Rosemary Flores, who was a teacher within the school system, Omaha Public, she was a music teacher, Omaha Public System. She volunteered her time there and started teaching us how to play the music, because she read music. And then we had Linda Perez, who's now Linda Perez Garcia. She was the artist. She was teaching our kids art. And we had a little group called Juventud. And there was probably 100, 200 kids belonged to that little group. And then, of course, we had a teacher out at UNO. His name was, ¿cómo se llama? ¿Cómo? No, not Luna. The guy who taught dance. The guy who taught the dance. Anyway, this guy taught us how to dance because he was a professional instructor. The university allowed him to come in and teach us how to dance these folk songs. Yeah, but Dr. Luna, he came in and actually offered Chicano awareness classes at the Chicano Awareness Center. So everything was going good. Everything was reinforcing. Man, we were into it. We were demanding more positions. We were demanding better jobs. The 60s were and 70s were a powerful time. But then we have this new in-migration. We had this new in-migration of quote-unquote Latinos. And there was a mixture that included more than just Mexicans. And so the system, again, in an attempt to pigeonhole people of color, brown people, they went ahead and created this Latino Hispanic type of definition. And what that did was put a halt. Remember all the time that this bigoted racist system is still operating, still churning. Everything designed for the people that are WASP, the white Anglo-Saxons. And that keeps going. And meanwhile, we're trying to reinforce who we are, allow us to be proud of who we are, identify with something, and we're able to get along. But then in comes this in-migration. Now, after a few years, once it cooled down from the civil rights of the 60s and 70s, the system, again, that's grinding away, they started taking whatever advantages they were giving to Chicanos and blacks and Native people and others through programs like affirmative action. They started slowly eroding that. So our Chicano Awareness Center, once it became more of a service-oriented type center, because we started with, let's say, $1,000 budget. Well, soon we began to get some proposals in there and funding. We got into the tens of thousands, and we started offering more services. And slowly but surely, the Chicano awareness part of the concept was going away. It was going away. And I think when you have an influx of a lot of tradition, a lot of culture, which is in-migration bought, you don't have the need to go back and reinforce that. That's critical. What I'm saying here is critical, because now you have Spanish language everywhere, you have Mexican dances everywhere, you have everything and Spanish, okay? Except that when you look at the fact that the system has not changed to accommodate that, that a generation or two down the road, they're going to find themselves in the same place that I found myself, which was trying to get into a system that's impenetrable. And so it's critical now that we've been lost in the mud, so to speak, where you come and call us Latino, there's no way to self-identify, because that's what it takes to at least from a psychological perspective, that's what it takes to survive in a world that is not really made for you. If that changes, if that model of hegemony changes and is inclusive, it's inclusive of the different cultures, the different traditions. That's done through multicultural education. That's done through affirmative action, where they start putting people into these positions of authority and all that. As long as you don't have that, in a generation or two, when these people move away, like I know nothing about my Mexico. I mean, even though my grandparents were from Mexico, I know nothing about Mexico, so I never had any relationship. I was American as apple pie. I think I told you that before. And so it's critical that we understand that I'm not anti-Latino. I'm anti the concept of Latinismo, because it doesn't allow you to self-identify anymore. You're caught up in this really amorphous mass of humanity, and you can't self-identify. Why? Because people who are Peruvians, for example, have different traditions and customs. It's a different culture. People who are from Central America, it's not the same as being an American of Mexican descent or a Mexican that's coming with this in migration. Mexico has different traditions, different languages, different cultures, customs than anybody else. And so when you try to put all of this thing under this thing called Latinismo, you kill the movement. You kill self-identity. And so whoever is in charge of the institutions, in this case, let's talk about the educational institution. If your curriculum, if your lesson plans are sensitive to the people that are in your school, and your history classes that you teach about the different ethnic groups, if you talk about the value of Spanish language, it's a second language, and don't use it as a negative, for example. If you talk about, let's say, the Cinco de Mayo and how you talk about it to your students, tell them it's not that these people want to stay in Mexico, it's just that part of their traditions and culture. It's like Irish. St. Pat's Day, I think I talked about that before too, how we're all Irish on St. Pat's Day. But other than that, I don't know too much about the Irish, but I know they have beautiful customs, beautiful dances, beautiful language, dialects. And so that's what you have to do. And what you're doing is you're creating a permanent second class again by not changing the hegemony. And the hegemony is made up of institutions. And so Latino, identifying as a Latino, cuts you off right at the halfway mark. Why? Because there's no such thing as Latino culture. There's no such thing as Latino language. There's no such thing as Latino cuisine. You see, and you have to fight against that if you're interested in self-identification. Otherwise, you're going to build this whole generation of self-haters again. When you're hoping that if there's an accident or somebody gets killed, it ain't a Mexican. And that says it all. I mean, that really says it all. We have to start taking this negative connotation and doing it, creating a positive. Now, we did that back in the 60s and 70s to the Chicano Awareness Center, but that's no longer there. It's now called the Latino Center of the Midlands. We used to have the Mexican American Commission. Now it's called the Latin American Commission. That's all well and good, but those who are advocating for self-determination and self-identification, which is the answer. It is the answer. You don't have to be a mental giant to figure that out. Is that our job, our advocacy has to be oriented towards trying to get the system to change institutionally so that it becomes part of growing up in America. And when you see a Mexican, you know that his name ain't Pancho. You know, you appreciate his language, you appreciate how long he's been here, his ancestry. We are I am a part of the original tribe. I'm a mestizo, you know. My people have been here for centuries on one side and then centuries on the other, if I have European blood in me. So if you see me, and you don't have to ask me what part of Mexico I'm from, you're doing good. Because that's right away, if you suffer from that, if you look at a person that's brown and you say, gosh, I wonder what part of Mexico they're from, that's a problem. Listen, I want to thank you very much for being or listening in tonight. I'm going to put up these graphics and stuff to give you further information as to how you can come and record here in South Omaha. And so until we meet again, hasta la próxima. God bless you, and thank you for tuning in.